Welcome to the first video in a series covering orders of battle for Operation Torch. We'll begin the series discussing the Allied land forces. In total, they numbered 107,453 Anglo-American soldiers, 9,911 vehicles, and 96,089 tons of supplies, divided into three task forces: Eastern, Center, and Western. First, we'll examine the Eastern Task Force, commanded by Lieutenant General Kenneth Anderson. An outwardly reserved character, he did not court popularity either with his superiors or with the public. A dour Scot, his Allied forces headquarters codename was Grouch. He admitted to, quote, a queer sort of shyness, end quote, that inhibited him socially. His American superior, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, wrote that he was, quote, blunt, at times to the point of rudeness, end quote. In consequence, he is less well known than many of his contemporaries. The Eastern Task Force consisted of 32,810 troops, 4,115 vehicles, and 27,291 tons of supplies aimed for Algiers. One of the main formations in the Eastern Task Force was the British 78th Infantry Division, commanded by Major General Vivian Evelet. It was formed on May 25, 1942, specifically for Operation Torch. For Operation Torch, it contained two infantry brigade groups, the 11th and the 36th. Both had 3 battalions. Under the 11th Infantry Brigade Group was the 2nd Battalion Lancashire Fusiliers, 5th Battalion Northamptonshires, and 1st Battalion East Surreys. And the 36th Infantry Brigade Group were the 5th Battalion, the Buffs, 6th Battalion, Royal West Kents, and 8th Battalion, Argyll, and Sutherland Highlanders. The brigades selected for the division were all veterans of the fighting in France and had taken part in the Dunkirk evacuation. The division would go on to serve in Tunisia, Sicily, and Italy. The Eastern Task Force also contained units of the American 34th Infantry Division, commanded by Major General Charles Ryder. The division was established as the 34th of the National Guard in August 1917, consisting of units from North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, and Minnesota. The division's motto is Attack, Attack, Attack. The division trained in Northern Ireland until it boarded ships to travel to North Africa. The forces for Operation Torch were comprised of the 168th and 39th Infantry Regiments. The division is credited with amassing 517 days of frontline combat, more than any other division in the U.S. Army. There were also 2 commando units, the No. 1 Commando, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Trevor, and the No. 6 Commando, led by Lieutenant Colonel Lane McAlpine. The commandos were formed in 1940 by the order of Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister. He called for specially trained troops that would, quote, develop a reign of terror down the enemy coast, unquote. At first they were a small force of volunteers who carried out small raids against enemy-occupied territory. But by 1943, their role had changed into lightly equipped assault infantry, which specialized in spearheading amphibious landings. The men for No. 1 Commando were all originally from the disbanded No. 6 and No. 8 independent companies, and formed the commando on 13 June 1940. Then, on 27th of July 1940, the commando became part of the No. 1 Special Service Battalion. It was reformed as No. 1 Commando again on 5th March 1941 and stationed in Dartmouth. Operations No. 1 Commando participated in included Operation Chopper, a raid on the French coast on the night of 27th August 1941. During Operation Torch, No. 1 Commando became the first unit to wear the infamous Commando Green Beret. Next, let's look at the Center Task Force. It was commanded by Major General Lloyd Frendenhall, and Oran was its main target. It was a mass of 40,800 troops and included 2,843 vehicles and 12,601 tons of supply. In the Center Task Force was the 1st Infantry Division. The 1st Infantry Division was commanded by Major General Terry de la Mesa Allen. In the Torch landings, taking part were the 16th Infantry Regiment, the 18th Infantry Regiment, and the 26th Infantry Regiment. It had seen continuous service since its organization in 1917 during World War I. It was officially nicknamed the Big Red One after its shoulder patch, and is also nicknamed the Fighting First. However, the division has also received troop monikers of the Big Dead One and the Bloody First, as puns on the respective officially sanctioned nicknames. The 1st Expeditionary Division, later designated the 1st Infantry Division, was constituted on 24th of May 1917. The division departed the New York port of embarkation on 1st of August 1942, arrived in Bayminster in southwest England about a week later, and departed 22nd October 1942 for the combat amphibious assault of North Africa. William O. Darby was the commander of the 1st Ranger Battalion, the first Americans to see active combat in the European theater of World War II were 44 enlisted men and 5 officers from the 1st Ranger Battalion. Dispersed among the Canadians and British commandos, these men were the first American ground soldiers to see action against the Germans in the disastrous Dieppe raid, officially known as Operation Rudder. 3 American Rangers were killed and several captured. The first American soldier killed in Europe in World War II was part of the Dieppe raid, Ranger Lieutenant E.V. Laustalot. The 1st Armored Division was commanded by Major General Orlando Ward. Landing in Oran was Combat Command B, which contained 2 task forces, Green and Red. On July 15, 1940, the 1st Armored Division, largely an expanded and reorganized version of the 7th Cavalry Brigade, was activated at Fort Knox under the command of Major General Bruce Magruder. The 1st Cavalry Regiment was redesignated as 1st Armored Regiment, and 13th Cavalry Regiment was redesignated as 13th Armored Regiment under the 1st Armored Brigade, 1st Armored Division. For more than 2 years after its activation, the 1st Armored Division trained at Fort Knox, and the division pioneered and developed tank gunnery and strategic armored offensives, while increasing from 66 medium-sized tanks to over 600 medium and light armored vehicles. For Operation Reservist, the 3rd Battalion of the 6th Armored Infantry Regiment, the Regulars, was selected. The motto, quote, "Regulars, by God," unquote, derives from the Battle of Chippewa in the War of 1812, in which British Major General Phineas Riall noticed that the approaching regiment had on the uniforms of militia, which the British had defeated at Queenston Heights. Instead, the Americans pressed the attack. Riall is assumed to have said, quote, "Those are regulars, by God," unquote, though the only source of this was opposing U.S. General Winfield Scott. The 6th Regiment was formed in 1812 as the 11th Infantry Regiment. The regiment participated in the War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, the American Civil War, the Indian Wars, the Spanish-American War, the Philippine-American War, the Pancho Villa Expedition, World War I, and World War II. Operation Villain was assigned to the 2nd Battalion of the 509th Parachute Infantry Regiment, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Edson Rath. They were carried by 60th Troop Carrier Group in 39 C-47s, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Schofield. It was the first parachute infantry unit of the U.S. Army to make a combat jump during World War II. With the advent of the war, the United States Armed Forces foresaw a need for highly mobile units that the Allies could quickly insert into the theater of battle. The 509th Parachute Infantry Regiment was originally constituted on 14th March 1941 as the 504th Parachute Battalion and activated on 5th October 1941 at Fort Benning, Georgia. The 503rd and 504th Parachute Infantry Battalions were joined together to form the 503rd Parachute Infantry Regiment on 24th February 1942 at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. The 504th Parachute Infantry Battalion was reorganized and redesignated as the 2nd Battalion, 503rd Parachute Infantry Regiment, and its companies A, B, and C were redesignated as companies D, E, and F, respectively, of the 503rd Parachute Infantry Regiment. In June 1942, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Edson Duncan Rath, the 2nd Battalion, 503rd Parachute Infantry Regiment, was detached from the 503rd Parachute Infantry Regiment and sailed to Scotland, becoming the first American parachute unit to go overseas in World War II. It was attached to the British 1st Airborne Division for training, which included mass tactical jumps from C-47 aircraft at 350 feet, extensive night training, and speed marching for 10 miles to and from the training area daily, and on one occasion marching 32 miles in 11 hours. Just prior to Operation Torch, on 2nd November 1942, the battalion was again redesignated as the 2nd Battalion, 509th Parachute Infantry Regiment. Finally, the Western Task Force, which was 33,843 American troops commanded by Major General George S. Patton. Patton's colorful image, hard-driving personality, and success as a commander were at times overshadowed by his controversial public statements. His philosophy of leading from the front and his ability to inspire troops with vulgarity-ridden speeches, such as the famous address to the Third Army, attracted favorable attention. His strong emphasis on rapid and aggressive offensive action proved effective. While Allied leaders held sharply differing opinions on Patton, he was regarded highly by his opponents in the German High Command. A popular award-winning biographical film released in 1970 helped transform Patton into an American folk hero. Sub-Task Force Goalpost was commanded by Major General Lucien Truscott and included the 60th Infantry Regiment of the 9th Infantry Division and the 1st Battalion of the 66th Armor Regiment. The 60th Infantry was organized in June 1917, 2 months after the American entry into World War I, from cadre furnished by the 7th Infantry Regiment. In November, it was assigned to the 5th Division and underwent its baptism of fire on the Western Front the following year. The regiment participated in the cans of Saint-Mihiel, Alsace and Lorraine, and finally in the Meuse-Argonne offensive. The 66th Armor Regiment is the oldest armored unit in the United States Army, tracing its lineage to the 301st Tank Battalion, which served with distinction soon after it was formed in the First World War. The 301st trained at Camp Meade, Maryland, where then Captain Dwight D. Eisenhower was an instructor. It has often been rumored that the 301st, the parent unit of the 66th, was first commanded by Colonel George S. Patton, but this appears to not have been the case. While Patton was the first officer assigned to the Tank Corps, and while the 301st Tank Battalion was the first unit formed, Patton went nearly immediately to France to train Americans attached to Allied commands. The 301st was the only American heavy tank battalion to have seen action in the war. After the war, the 301st transitioned in the regular army to become the 66th Infantry Regiment Light Tanks. Major General Jonathan Anderson commanded Sub-Task Force Brushwood. It was comprised of 3rd Infantry Division's 7th Infantry Regiment, 30th Infantry Regiment, and 15th Infantry Regiment. It also included the 1st Battalion 67th Armor Regiment, 436th Coastal Artillery Battalion, and the 2nd Battalion 20th Engineer Regiment. The 3rd Division, the Rock of the Marne, was activated 21 November 1917, 7 months after the American entry into World War I, at Camp Green, North Carolina. 8 months later, it saw combat for the first time in France on the Western Front. The 3rd Division is the only division of the U.S. Army during World War II that fought the Axis on all European fronts and was among the first American combat units to engage in offensive ground combat operations. Audie Murphy, the most highly decorated American soldier of the war, served with the 3rd Division. The 3rd Infantry Division saw combat in North Africa, Sicily, Italy, France, Germany, and Austria for 531 consecutive days. The 1st Battalion, 67th Armor Regiment, was originally constituted on 24th March 1923 in the regular army as Company A, 19th Tank Battalion. On 1st July 1940, the 20th Engineer Combat Regiment was organized and activated at Fort Benning, Georgia, under the command of Colonel Bill Heavey. On 1st November 1942, the 1st Battalion and the regimental headquarters traveled to New York and boarded the U.S. Army transport Cristobal, a pre-war Caribbean vacation cruise ship. At the time of departure, no one knew that the regiment was bound for assignment in the Western Task Force of Operation Torch. The soldiers were not told of their destination, Casablanca, French North Africa, until after the ship was at sea a couple of days. Lastly, Sub-Task Force Blackstone was commanded by Major General Ernest Harmon and contained the 9th Infantry Division's 47th Infantry Regiment, Combat Command B's 2nd Armored Division, and 2nd and 3rd Battalion of the 67th Armored Regiment. The 47th Infantry Regiment was constituted 15th May 1917 in the regular army as Company C, 47th Infantry. The 2nd Armored Division was formed at Fort Benning, Georgia, on 15th July 1940. It was originally commanded by Major General Charles L. Scott and Colonel George S. Patton, Jr. in charge of training. Scott was promoted to command the 1st Armored Corps in November of that year, which put Patton, now a brigadier general, in command of the division. The division, which in February 1942 passed over to the command of Major General Willis D. Crittenberger, served with the 1st, 7th, and 9th Armies throughout the war. This concludes our video on the order of battle for the Allied land forces for Operation Torch. Next, we'll be taking a look at the Allied naval forces. Thanks so much for your time and consideration in watching this video. Please like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.